This week, we're going to be looking at race, mission, and the church. And I think about this as a threefold cord not easily broken, using the language of Ecclesiastes. So this is often quoted in marriage ceremonies. But there's an intricate, and I'd call it a diabolical relationship between the mission of the church, the concept of race, and Christian mission. We'll look at this in three parts. So Tuesday, today's focus, Tuesday the 16th, looks at race and mission in the age of empire, specifically looking at the origins of this. How did this strange and mysterious in some ways, but really diabolical relationship get started? And we'll do that in a couple of ways. We'll look both at a Native American perspective, historical perspective, and we'll look at it through the eyes of Willie James Jennings. And we'll think about the work that Willie did in his Christian imagination, and thinking theologically, really, about the origins of the concept of race, which was not a major concept philosophically or historically in European circles or in other places in the world, for that matter, to the extent of our knowledge, but that really explodes onto the world stage in the 15th century with the origins of the slave trade. And Willie James Jennings helps us to think about this. He won the Grawemeyer Award, a prestigious award in American religious literary circles. He won it for this book, and it is it's a dense read. It's a beautiful read. Willie writes like a poet, and his use of words is really compelling and very powerful. And so I highly recommend this. I would give yourself some time to read him. He's one that I read a paragraph or two and then have to sit and think a little bit, because he writes with a weight, with a density that's important to listen to. So we'll be listening for this in this first section on the origins of this dangerous relationship between race and Christian mission. On Thursday, the 18th, we'll be looking at the enduring impact of this relationship. I would argue, and I'll argue both in the first and the third week of the class, that this enduring colonial relationship impacts the way that we understand, the way that our congregations understand mission, and the way that they enact them. When they walk out the church doors, they are reading from a script that was written in the colonial days. That will be my contention. And so we'll think about that. And I'll invite you to tell me I'm wrong. I pray that you can convince me that I'm wrong. I pray that you're right if you believe I'm wrong. It's some weighty questions that we'll be looking at, and I think it helps to illuminate our conversations about race in this country, to realize how deep and pernicious these impacts have been. Finally, on Friday the 19th, we'll look at the mysterious space that racist history opens up for us in the strangest of ways. And this is, to me, points to the graciousness of God, who even in the absolute worst of human history finds ways to redeem our mess ups and turn them into something that can be most powerful and most healing. So we'll think about that as we move from reflections on race and Christian mission and move into some positive strategies. I want to say a word, if I could. This week, the second, what comes out to be week 3, week of the 16th of June, is a difficult week in many ways. It causes us to have a lot of strong feelings about the subject, because this issue is so hidden, so implicit, so invisibilized by our society. And we'll look at this in a twofold way. We'll look at the harm done to Native Americans through the doctrine of discovery, And we'll look at the harm done to the peoples of Africa and now in diaspora on a continuing basis. And we'll look at that through the lens of what we learn about ourselves and about our predecessors' understandings of Christian mission. Okay, that's kind of the trajectory we're going through this week. It's a hard conversation, and so I encourage you to bear with it. This is the part, you remember that image of the table, this is the part of deconstruction. We really need to, I believe, decolonize our understanding of mission if we're to be able to construct a mission in the way of Jesus Christ. And we'll talk more about that and some of the elements of that in a future session. But this is the week of deconstruction, the taking apart, and that hurts because many of our cherished notions of church and mission and what is good and right in the world, we need to deconstruct those and look at some of the motivations behind them. So I'd ask you to bear with me and to enter into this space with in a sense of prayer and a desire to open our hearts to the movement of God's Spirit so that we can be healed ourselves and lead our communities into greater healing. Okay, so we'll be thinking this week about race and mission in an age of empire. I mentioned that doctrine of discovery. That's the historic moment that Mark Charles and Sung Chang Ra write about in their Unsettling Truths, the ongoing and dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery. This is a painful text. It's highly readable, but it all focuses on this. This is the first of several papal bulls or proclamations by the Pope. This one in 1452 by Pope Nicholas V. And you see the words there. It's powerful wording, and it basically reduces all non-Christians from Saracens, that is Muslims, and pagans, anyone who does not believe in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. It casts them into the category of the theological and political and sociological other, and relegates them to perpetual slavery, and it justifies their use by the victors, that is us, we Christians, for our own personal profit. Well, those are powerful and damning words, and we'll look at that in the reading by Charles and Ra. The question that I would ask you to bear in mind as you read this text is this. Mark Charles and Sung Chan Ra argue that with the doctrine of discovery, the church negated the humanity of Africans and indigenous peoples and theologically justified the brutality and atrocities of the genocide and slave trade. How did this proclamation shape and influence the texture of subsequent Christian mission? That's the first question I'd like you to look at in the readings, and the reading team will be writing on this, and then I'll invite you to hop on the discussion board to put your comments in as well. That's the first question. In Willie Jennings' Zurara's Tears, this is one chapter. It's the opening chapter of his book, his award-winning book, Christian Imagination. I'd like you to think about this moment. It's such a powerful piece. And Willie does beautifully what anthropologists, beginning with Clifford Geertz and others in the 1970s and 80s, will talk about as thick description. He takes an incident, it's almost a ritual because it's an economic transaction, but that the representative of the King of Portugal and his couriers decide to ritualize. And Jennings does a masterful job of exegeting, if you will, this ceremony, this incident, and the response of the people to it. Both those who are being enslaved, who are being separated from their family members brutally and cast into other groups where they'll be sold and transported to another world, literally. We see that happening, and also Zurara, who is the scribe of Prince Henry, who leads this action, it's his reaction that is the key moment for Jennings in this. And he does a masterful exegesis, or looks more deeply at the actions and the statements made to see what's behind them. So you'll be learning more about that concept of thick description later on in this month. Okay, that's for the reading of Zoroaster's. The question that I have for you is this, the second prism question for this week. How does Jennings argue that the actions of the Portuguese nation state, the church, and the slave traders conspired to conflate Christian history with one of the most hideous economic operations in history? What does he say about the role of race in this process? How are concepts of blackness and whiteness henceforth powerfully imbued with meaning in pernicious and even damning ways? These are the questions that I'll invite you to think about as you do the reading in the first place, but also as you respond on the question board. I would call your attention again, if I could, and you might even go back to the syllabus and reread those respect guidelines, because we're going to read things that will trigger different things in different ones of us, depending on where we sit at the table, as it were, of American society. So I invite you to enter into this conversation in a spirit of prayer and humility from whatever perspective you come. And I think it'll be a rich discussion. So I wish you good reading, and I'll look forward to our conversation in class. Thank you.